Well, hello and welcome to the Alpha Anywhere Demo and Q&A webcast. My name is Dave McCormick. I'm VP of Product Management here at Alpha Software, and I am pleased to present Dion McCormick, no relation, who's our lead solutions engineer here at Alpha. Here I know Dion has a presentation prepared for you to do a little show and tell about some things that you could do in Alpha Anywhere, but also he and we are here to answer your questions. So please type those questions into the questions box of the GoToWebinar control panel. Anything you've been curious about doing in Alpha Anywhere, anything you'd like us to discuss, go ahead and type in those questions because we'd love to hear from you and we'd love to talk about it. So let's get started. Hello, Dion, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Excellent. Let me go ahead and make you the presenter. And I'll let you know when I can see your screen.
Okay. Cool, there we go.
There we are, awesome.
Everything's set up. I'm doing another little setup here. Oh, okay, we're good to go. Let me go back here and we're ready to go. Okay, well, thank you everybody for joining us. Just want to make sure my audio is set up there correctly. We appreciate you taking the time out of your busy schedule to join us. We have a real quick topic today, something that I've had a number of questions on the last few weeks, and I wanted to share that. We had a couple questions come in this week. We're going to take a look at them that came into guides at Alpha Software, which we always appreciate. We'll try to make sure we can get to that. If we don't, we will always follow up and work on those and get some answers for you. Then also, as Dave mentioned, it's very important for us that you take the time to go to your questions section of your GoToWebinar control panel and put in your questions there. We would really love to hear from you, and it really helps us in terms of your questions often are questions other people have. So by asking them, you are helping your fellow developers. As we've talked about before, you are the heart of what we do. This is why we do these meetings and why we have these, and we really appreciate your attendance and we appreciate you joining us each week. Also, happy Halloween, everybody. I hope everybody has some really fun trick-or-treating plans for today. I know I've got two little ones, and it's a big day for us here. So we're, it's going to be a nice, spooky, scary eve. Hearing a lot of Thriller for today for some reason. Every time I turn on the radio, all I hear is Thriller, which is not a bad thing. It's a great song, so I really enjoy it from there. I'm still trying to teach my little ones how to do the Thriller dance, like kind of the zombie moves. Those were just brilliant. I always love those. So much fun there. Now, also, I wanted to share too, real quick before we get into the demonstration portion. Dave has been hosting the Transform Tuesdays, and man, that is getting more and more interesting, Dave. I mean, as the maturity of the tool, as the capability of the tool continues to accelerate and sort of grow by leaps and bounds, the kind of content that's going on in Transform Tuesday is just amazing. And in fact, we had a fabulous one this week where Dave walked through just an amazing Transform application. It was Boiler Mainter. I know it had Boiler. I'm sorry.
Boiler Minder.
Minder. And it really took advantage of all the new capabilities of Transform. And what just blew me away, and I think this was a key element, we've talked about this a bit before, is the fact that before, to develop a mobile, disconnected, complex app, you used Alpha Anywhere. And that worked great. And people have done amazing things with Alpha Anywhere. And then Transform came along that helped a very specific use case, which was collecting complex data in the field. And it worked great. It made it so much easier to do just a quick and dirty, fast data collection app, but with sophisticated data collection. Well, with the advent of all the new features, including the Transform programming language and other things, what you can do in Transform is really sort of eking up on Alpha Anywhere. So as each release comes, you can do more in Transform that used to require Alpha Anywhere to develop a mobile app. It's really fun. And this Boiler Minder just did some cool stuff. It almost getting to the point where it's starting to get artificial intelligence. So I don't want you to make it evil, Dave. You got to cap it at a certain point. Yeah, I was kind of concerned. I joked around with Dan Brooklyn. I was saying, I just want to make sure that you haven't been talking to, anybody at Skynet about the language or what you're doing with Transform, because
exactly. It's getting very scary what it can do. Yeah,
it is getting it, and it's real fun and powerful. And what's even cooler is that right now it's still a bit of a programming tool, but what's planned in the next few months to the next quarter will actually even make it easier to do these things. So if you aren't joining us for Transform Tuesdays, send your request into guides@alphasoftware.com. Dave will get you on that list, and I got to tell you, you'll be amazed, and it'll really expand what you can do with Transform. And what we're finding also too is more and more of our developers who are Alpha Anywhere developers are realizing they can extend what they're doing for both their existing clients, their existing solutions using Transform, and they can do it very cost effectively and very, very quickly versus, oh, I've got to put in 3 to 6 months to build a dedicated app and do all those pieces here. And in fact, we have a number of people now, more and more are using Transform to do rapid prototyping for their clients. So they'll get an idea from their client, and their client will say, you know, wouldn't it be cool if we could do this? And what someone can do is within a matter of minutes, less than an hour, they can whip up an example in Transform, which may not have all the features, may not have all the functionality, but has the core elements to it, get it out, get it back into the hands of their customer and say, hey, is this what you're thinking of? And therefore you use a rapid prototyping methodology to kind of define and refine what you want to do. And then from there, you can actually move and do more of a dedicated Alpha Anywhere app, or say, hey, you know what? I know you wanted XYZ, but you know, we can do XY now, right away, and it can be launched in a week or whatever with some cleanup and whatever we need to do and maybe some integration work. Is that do it? And you'd be amazed how many people say, you know what? I will take XY in a week over waiting a couple months for X, Y, and Z. And then we can develop and add Z in later on, either through Transform when it matures enough, or they can then say, okay, now we can use that time so I can get that business value out in the field. Plus we can see how it's working to kind of build out the full solution in Alpha Anywhere. So highly recommend you
Transform is definitely used even if you don't end up using Transform at the end. So it does often happen that you start out with a Transform project and it's, you know, it's 80% of what you need that you've actually developed like in an hour. And then when it comes time to deliver the full thing with everything, you probably jump back into Alpha Anywhere, which just gives you a little bit more power and control. But you can get a heck of a long way there. And also, Transform is free for development and demoing purposes. So if you need a sandbox license, by all means, send over an email to guides@alphasoftware.com, and we are happy to get you set up at no charge. Also, for those of you who are interested in Transform Tuesday, I have posted the Transform Tuesday registration link in the chat window here.
Thank you.
You go to Webinar Control Panel. So if you click on that, you can get signed up. So Dion, thanks very much for the Transform plug. I appreciate it.
Yeah, no, and one little follow-up on that is that I have seen a number of people who say they actually are kind of using Transform as a sales tool because they can go in for new opportunities and whip up, and I call it whip up something really quick and show traction, show it to the client, get them excited, get them moving down the road. And so not only is it a rapid prototyping, but it's really being treated as a sales tool by some of our alpha developers to kind of, you know, get the ball rolling. And it's so much more impactful than sending someone a piece of paper with a bunch of diagrams and some wireframes and stuff to actually say, hey, download this, try it out. That is a huge difference in terms of people get excited. They see it's real. It becomes a much different process. So keep that in mind. So awesome. Last week, if you did not join us, we did spend time, and I want to kind of revisit it just very briefly, talking about the alpha development roadmap. This was presented at DEF CON 2018, and we went through that. If you haven't had a chance, go back and watch it because it really gives you an idea of where alpha is going. And specifically, alpha is not just Alpha Anywhere. Alpha is not just Alpha Transform. It's the combination of the two. And it's the classic, the sum of the parts is greater than the whole. Is that what we're finding more and more is that as you combine these technologies and as they're tightly integrated and capable together, they're easy to integrate together, you're going to be able to develop things that you never thought possible, and you're going to be able to do it in a very short period of time. So definitely check out the roadmap and the presentation we did last week. I think you'll find it very interesting, and you'll kind of have a better feel for where everything's going, so you can kind of allocate what you're going to do and what areas you're going to concentrate on. And it's helped me kind of refine my thinking and what I'm working on from there. Okay, so let's dive in. Today, dun, 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 client-side session variables. This is kind of a wonky, little more detailed kind of topic, but I find it's very, very important for people to understand the concept, especially in light of previously we've had a lot of questions around session variables, multiple tabs in a web browser. How do you handle that and other things? I think by knowing these techniques, you're going to get it. What I'm hoping is that I'll plant the seed. So when you get into a corner developing, which we all do, you'll go, oh, well, you know what? I remember something like this. And that it helps you kind of a way to handle something in particular. And what I'm also seeing more and more is that obviously the experience on the client is so important for the success of applications, especially on the mobile platforms, that the more you know about how to do tricks and other things on the client side, the better your apps are going to be. So we're going to cover the data client-side data cache very soon again, kind of recover that, do some other things that kind of show you some tricks on how you can speed up your apps and make things happen much more on the local client versus having everything on the server. But everybody knows session variables. They're critical. When you log in, you have a session. Session variables are maintained on the server itself. It is essentially a scratch pad, a storage update where you can throw things into it. And then during the life of a session for a client, whether it be in a web browser or in a mobile, on the server side, the server is going to maintain these session variables. So you can, for instance, know who the person is. You can load up some data with some parameters or some options that you're going to use, maybe some filter criteria, etc. And that works great. It's heavily built into Alpha. It works fabulous. Just remember, we have a new feature in the tool called, and I wonder if it's in, hold on a second here, just kind of a heads up. We've talked about it previously on one of the previous releases. Let me go to my project properties. Bear with me, it's a little side thing here, but do I have it in this version? It's the, no, this is my one here, but we have a new way to track kind of one of the key things people would use session variables with is by using it for storing like user information, like, oh, your user XYZ, I would go look up your zip code, your region ID, and things like that. Well, there's a new feature in the pre-release, and I want to really identify because I think this is important, is in the new release, it will go user, and I'm on the release notes here, which I'm going to copy and put into the chat window so you can go there directly. So we don't want to go to Vistaprint, we want to go user here. And bear with me. God, there's so many things that's the team. They're just very, very busy. Is it auditing or is it in the pre-release? Oh, you know what? It may be in the pre-release. So let me go to the release notes. And I apologize, I should have had this already up. I don't mean to waste anybody's time. But I'm taking it to the pre-release notes because it is in the pre-release. I think we're due for official release pretty soon.
Very soon.
Very slow. Come on, baby. Come on. Okay, let's see. So I have, that's the link here. Let me go back up to the top real quick. I should bookmark it, but I always go from the release notes itself. Old habits die hard. There we go. Now I click here and this should, there we go. And so I'm going to copy that and put it in. These are two that you should bookmark just so you don't waste time like I do. Don't do as I do as I say, kind of thing. So, and God, I can't wait to come back and do the ad hoc query builder. I mean, it's hard to keep up with these guys.
A lot of cool
We're going to need to
stuff
start having like twice meetings or so. Okay. And almost there. Bear with me. Where is that? And I'm sorry, if Sarah is online, you may be able to just give me a link. There is now the ability built into it. It's called the Extended User Information Table. And we did a demonstration. We talked about it a while. So basically built into the fabric of Alpha now is a concept called like the user information table. And most people have that. You have your security with your information about the person in our security system. And the main primary item is username. What is their user ID or name? And then you have another table that has all the other stuff, their zip code, their region ID. Well, what Alpha has done in a pre-release is now there's an official way to designate what that table is. And what's really exciting is that there's a whole bunch of functions around managing that data. And more importantly is when you're in grids and other stuff. So before, and the reason I mention this is before what a common practice would be, log in, go to a script and load up all this information into session variables and then use them later on. Well, what's kind of nice with the extended user information table is you don't have to do that a lot. You can actually, in grids and other places, you can now reference that data directly, which is really, really, really exciting and very there.
Hey,
And
Dion,
again,
while you're showing this off, take a look at the link that Sarah just
oh
posted.
yes, thank you, Sarah,
And she's
my
done all
hero.
this job of actually making it look nice. So
Yeah,
let's see that version.
yeah. Okay, I get it. I know what you're saying. I'm
No,
not.
I'm
I'm
not
not
saying
offended.
pre-release notes are
There you
nice, but
go. See, it's a
documentation's better.
pre-release feature. Don't, you
Yep,
know? So no,
perfect.
this is the way I go. So it's similar to like the repository, the text dictionary. You designate your basically where that information is in the system so that now Alpha as an environment knows where that is at. It knows the connection string, the table name. And remember, when you publish, you can change all these connection strings. So you can have one set of user information locally and then another on your server. And then once you can do that, and I'll scroll down here, there's a bunch of built-in functions, but more importantly is when you go into the grid to do like a filter, you actually can access this data right from in the grid. So we'll do a refresher once we have an official release. But again, very cool, something to check out. Be prepared to use this because it's going to make your life a lot easier. So before we'd store that stuff in session variables, but what was very interesting is that session variables had certain elements to it. First, they were only available during the active session. So someone logged in, it created the session environment when they logged out. You killed it because you didn't want that information floating around after it. And it was available for that session only. It doesn't persist after that. It's character-based. It can store complicated data, and it has native capabilities to leverage. Like in the grid, you can say, filter with this session variables and things like that. Now, the problem, though, was that you had a situation where that information only lived on the server. So if you wanted to interact with that data on the client side, you were kind of out of luck. But the development team introduced a new methodology where you can publish session variables to a client-side script, meaning that you can say, well, these session variables that normally live on the server that you would access through AxBasic, through other elements there, guess what? Now they're available on the client. So you can designate one or more. It can be a subset. You don't have to do all of them. And what it does is when it builds your mobile or your client, your web or your mobile front end, it actually inserts that data and brings it down. So now that server data is available here. Now, it is local, so it doesn't get updated until you refresh the page and do things like that. So you have to be a little wary that you don't get out of sync on it, but this is very handy. And what I want to do now is do a demonstration of the difference between server side and client side, which will hopefully illuminate a little bit more of how you may use the client side published variables. One thing about client side published variables, they can be referenced as just like you do server side, but also there are a number of JavaScript functions. So if you have JavaScript that is running for whatever you're doing, some little JavaScript script on your mobile device or doing something like that, you can actually refer to these published client-side variables, which is very handy for doing more sophisticated things. So with that, I hope I haven't confused everybody so far, but I'm going to go into my development environment. And for people who are new, I'm in the Alpha Anywhere development environment, and I've already created a new control here called control show hide. But I'm going to go ahead and build this from scratch. So I'm going to create a new control. In this case, I want to create a UX control, and it's called a web component. Going to click next. In this case, I don't want a grid, I want a UX, and I'll click next. And I'm going to come back and talk about grids in a few minutes because it's very important. Then I'm going to click OK. So now I have a new UX with no controls. So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to add two text boxes. And the first text box is going to be server text box and client text box. So they're both text boxes, but I'm going to operate one with server kind of side stuff and the second with client side stuff there. All right. So when I do a working preview, you'll see that it now has, there we go. I've got two text boxes here. This one I'll manipulate server side and the other one there. Okay. So let me go back into design. So let me save this so we have it. And I'll go ahead and do here. I'm learning the trick to do it before we actually have the webinar, so it doesn't go too far off the rails.
That's almost like cheating, Dion. Wow.
I know.
It's like studying before the test kind of thing.
Ignore the man behind the behind the curtain, Actually, I just hired someone and they sent this to me and I'm just replaying it. This is all just canned text. I'm really getting efficient. Leverage, baby, leverage. Okay, so what I want to do is this. Normally what would happen is when someone logs in, you set some session variables, and most people do that through either like a login processing page, or if everybody's going to a dashboard, like a tabbed UI, you do it at the head of the tabbed UI. But normally it is. In our case, I don't have a whole environment, so I'm just going to go here to the server-side events, to the onDialog initialize, and I'm just going to create a session variable called show hide is equal to show. Okay, so every time this runs, it's going to create a little session variable. And it's going to put currently show into it. Now, again, this would normally be set. So once this UX comes up, I'm just, these sessions exist. Okay, so I have a session variable that basically just says, should I show the fields or should I hide them? And so I'm going to go ahead and copy this session variable right here. Okay, go back to my controls. So let's focus on the server-side text box. Now, if you're using server-side stuff, it's pretty straightforward. All the session stuff's there. And in fact, if you'll notice, if I go to server text box and I scroll over to the right and scroll down to here, which is the show hide expression. By the way, as a hint, since there's so many properties, I can click here on properties and type the word show. And you can see I actually have two show hide expressions, one which is server side, the other is client side. So let me double click on show hide expression server side. Takes me down here. So now I can go in here and I can say, show this. And so this is an expression. So it basically says, when I go to render this text box, I'm going to look here, and if there's an expression there, I'm going to run that. And if it's true, I'll show it. If it's not, so I'm going to go this and go true. Okay. So this basically says that if my session, if my session show hide is equal to true, show this text box. So let's go ahead and look at that. And if I haven't screwed up, wait, oh, not true. It's show. Might actually be good. Okay. If it says show, then I should see that. Okay, it's showing. Now, if I say it's hide, so that's how it works there. Now, if I go back to my server-side event and I say, oh, when I load this, I want that to be hidden. So I'm actually loading into the session variable. And now what's going to happen is when it goes to display this text box, it's going to look here and it's going to say, is session show hide equal to show? Then yes, if not. And in our fact, it's not. There we go. It's not showing. So I can control the show and hide of that using a session variable by merely referencing this show hide expression here. Now, let's look at the client side. So I'm going to go ahead and click at the client text box here. And you'll notice that we have on that text box, we have our show hide expression for server, but you'll notice I also have a show hide expression for client, which is very powerful because this is all evaluated on the client. So you can look at other controls. You don't have to be connected to the server. So let's say I would like to use that session variable to control the show hide expression, but on the client side, which is all rendered in JavaScript versus on the server side. Now you go, okay, great. I'm going to go in here and I'm going to paste this is equal to show. Okay. Now, when I do that, and I'll go through that again, so it's a little slower. I didn't mean to go too fast. I'm going to put in that, and I'm going to say is equal to show. You're on the right track, but watch what happens when I click OK. It gives me a warning, and it says, okay, here's the deal. You're referring to a session variable, which is a server-side variable, in a client-side expression. For that to work, you need to publish this session variable to the client, i.e., you are responsible for telling Alpha which of these items should be available to the client over here. So I'm going to go back here. I'm going to click great. Okay, sure. So the way we do that is we do that at the properties level for the UX. So I go to properties here, and then I click on the properties, and I'll just type in the word publish, and you'll notice there's a publish session variables, and there's a property. And again, this is on the properties for the overall UX. So I open that up, and in here, it actually tells you, you have to put in here, and it has to be all uppercase, the name of the session variable that will now be published to the client. So when this UX gets rendered on the server, it looks in here and says, oh, this person needs that session variable. So I'm going to go grab whatever the current state of that session variable is and include that when I send it down to the browser to render this, this UX. Now you'll notice down here, you could actually set a default value for that if you want to. You'll also notice that if you have more fancy JavaScript, you can actually, once you've done this, you can actually refer to the session variable in your scripts. Now, very, very, very important. JavaScript is text or is case sensitive. It's very it's insanely case sensitive. It's one of the most annoying things I find about JavaScript, but that's me. You know, when you're doing alpha and you say, oh, session dot show hide or whatever you want to do, or let's say session, let's go session dot show hide. XBasic just says, hey, these are all the same thing. It reduces to the lowercase, you're good. But in JavaScript, these are all different. And so what you want to do, and I guess it's more of a pure, but you want to make sure you make everything up in uppercase when you put in your session here. So now that I've told the UX that, hey, when you show this, or when you create this UX and give it to them, go ahead and include that session show hide mount. And again, all uppercase. Now I'm going to go back to my controls. I'm going to go over to here and I want to do the same thing. Remember, case sensitive. So I'm going to go session dot show hide all in uppercase. It's just the way it works, and stay uppercase. Whenever you're doing session variables published, do everything in uppercase, you'll be saved. Now the actual value here will be whatever it is in that session variable. It's just the naming of the session variable that's important here. Okay, so now it's noting, it's giving me that same warning, but I've already gone through this, so I'll click go and go save. So again, my current XBasic server side is hide. So let's do show. Let's go back and do it show. And I'll do a working preview. Okay, oops, did I, wait, let's do a working preview. Oh, server side, let's see, oh, client side box is equal to show. And let me go to the properties, give my variable. Oh, what am I saying show side? It's show hide. Again, not only uppercase, but it cares if you can spell. Yeah, picky.
Needs to be the same word, apparently.
I know, they should have autocorrect. Come on, you know what I want to do. It's like, the reality is they should just hook to like Alexa or and say, well, you don't want to do that. Oh,
you know what? I'm sorry I didn't interrupt you, because actually the questions box is lighting up with people saying show side.
Yeah,
no, it should be show hide.
I'm going to show you. Okay, hey, hey, welcome. I see the peanut gallery's watching today, so it's good. Okay, so you can see my text side box there, and then I'm going to go back here, and I'm going to go back to my server side, and I'm just going to make this hide. So again, when I run this, I'm just setting the session variable here, but that could have been set anywhere in my system. When this gets rendered, it takes that, puts it on the client side, and now you'll notice nothing is showing because both the server side text box and the client side text box is evaluating that. But what's really neat is that since this is a client side now, you can refer to other things and other pieces. Now, where that's important is, let me go ahead and go in and do something real quick. Just, you're like, well, why don't I just do it for server side? Well, let me go into, sorry, I'm going to run over here and just grab one of my existing grids, and I'm going to go to a grid field, and I want to show you something. If I go to company name over here, and if you look in here, guess what? Let's see, where is it? It is, you'll notice that we only have a client show hide expression in the grid. There's no property here that says server side show hide. Now there's a trick you can do that. In the server side event on grid initialize, you can do some tricks in here. But if you wanted to just make it easy, saying, listen, contact name, I want it to only show when session.showHide is equal to show, then I use the same technique. I put in that session show hide here. I go to the properties of the grid. I search, and it's over here, to the publish, and I publish those session variables here. And I have one already, but I do another one here called session dot show hide. And now you can use that same session variable, even though that feature didn't exist in the grid. So as you can see, there's some really cool things you can do with this functionality. And again, as we mentioned earlier, if you have other scripts on there, you can say, if this session variable is this, then grab that out during your script and do these other things with it. So that's one of the reasons I wanted to show you is that, well, yeah, sure, you may have the show hide expression in certain controls, but other ones you can't. And so that's why this kind of technique is very, very powerful and very handy. So bottom line, session variables are server side, but if you on your controls say you want to publish one or many of those, it will take Alpha will take the work on and pull that information out and put it into information that's available on the client side. And then within that, you can then use that within your expressions on the client side by merely referring to it. And remember, it is uppercase. It's just the way JavaScript works. So just whenever you're doing with client-side published session variables, just do things uppercase and you'll avoid problems. And also another real important tip is to learn to spell and stay in school. and that will also help you a lot in terms of being a much more efficient programmer. Cool, but questions about that?
Yes, so question one has to do with those variables. Okay, so you've taken a session variable, which is a server-side variable, and you have published it to the client side, which does that mean that you have created a JavaScript variable on the other side? And can you use that JavaScript variable in other things if it's been published?
Absolutely. That's a great question. And the answer is yes. Basically, behind the scenes, I think it actually sticks it in local storage. Or, I don't know, there's a mechanism for it. But the important thing, which is really cool, is let me go ahead and let me put a button on here. Okay. And I'm just going to say alert is the name of that button. I'm going to go into the click event for this button, and I'm going to go into text mode. So now I'm in the JavaScript editor. So I could sit there and say alert, hello, and it would just say hello. But what I want to do is now that I've published that session variable, I'm going to go ahead and insert a little piece of code to pull that out so I can use it in my script. So I'm going to go in here to insert UX component method because I just don't remember it. I'm not that smart. So I go there and I'm going to go ahead and say session. And you'll notice there is a built-in function called dialog object get session variable. So I'm going to go ahead and copy this example and I'm going to paste it here. And instead of var1, I'm going to put in here show hide, which is the name of my published variable. So now the system will grab this out of wherever it's hiding it and putting it into my var. And now I'll go in here and just say show or alert my var. And if I did this correctly, what will happen is when this little button is clicked, it'll grab it out of its special hidden place and show the alert there. Now let's go in here. So I'll go alert. There it is, hide. Now I'll go in, I'm going to set the session variable. I have not set any local variables. So I'm going to set my session variable. I'm going to run the same exact script. You'll notice it obeys that, but now when I click alert, it's now showing me that session variable. Now, again, be careful because, if that session variable changes later on and you're still on this client, it's going to use whatever that when this UX was initialized. But every time you do an Ajax callback and stuff, I believe it refreshes all that information so that it kind of says, hey, here's the current version of all the session variables kind of stuff. But you'd have to play with that.
So that was my second question. If you tried setting that client-side variable to something else, it would have no effect on this.
That's correct.
Session variable
Yeah.
that
You have to then, what you would do is you would just run an Ajax callback and set it. So to do that, I would do something like, let's try that. I mean, if people don't mind. So I'm going to click button here. And this is a little more advanced, so for people who aren't familiar, bear with me. So I'm going to go set session, okay? So now I'm going to go here to the click event, and I'm going to add a new action, and that action is called a Ajax callback. Because what I want to do is actually call a function on the back end to set that session variable. So let's try it. Oops, okay, let me go back in here. create it, copy. I'm going to do this kind of quick just because I want to just see if it works more than anything else, and I can walk through it there. So when this button is clicked, it runs this session. So now I can say session.showHide is equal to, what did I call it? Is show. Okay, so I'm going to set it originally show, but I'm going to make it hide. So I'm going to go to XBasic functions, and I'm going to go ahead and say session.showHide is equal to hide. So we're initially going to be shown, then I'm going to send something back. Okay. Now I can go working preview. So you'll notice everything is hit. If I click alert, here's show. So my initial state was show. It got pulled down. It's local. Everything good to go. So now I'm going to set the session variable, and nothing's going to happen when I hit the button. But now what I've done is I set the server variable, but you'll notice what happened. Did you see that? Was kind of cool. Since the session variable was set to hide for the server side, it actually hid that field. And also I can do this alert, and you'll notice that it reset my client side. So anytime I refresh this UX, either through an Ajax callback or reloading it, it's going to reload that there. Now, you'll notice we have an issue though. For the client side one, this one did not update. So let me walk through that real quick. I will start out here. The server side is currently setting to show. When I click alert, or I'm sorry, when I click set session, it's going to go back to the server. It's going to update the server and say, now things are hidden. When it comes back here, it's going to do two things. One is that it says, oh, you hid a server side thing. So it's going to hide this text box for us automatically, which is kind of nice. And also it's going to reset our local variable now that is a session variable. So let's go ahead and do that. And I click alert. So now things are hide. But you'll notice my client side expression here didn't refresh because that's all client side. So there's a trick. What you can do is the following, and this is a little more geeky wonky, but let me go ahead and do this here. Let's see. And I just remember this from a project I did a while ago, is that, and let me go ahead there. Okay. There is a command called refresh client-side computations, and this forces the UX to go through, and anywhere you have a client-side expression, it redoes that. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna cut that out. So I'm gonna go into, and again, I apologize if I'm getting in the weeds, so if I am, just bear with me here. And I'm gonna go set session variable is equal to, okay. So what's going to happen is when it goes back to the server, its first thing it's going to do is set that session to be hidden. And then I'm going to tell it to send back to the UX this refresh client-side computations. And that will force all the client-side computations on the UX on the local side to be refreshed. So if this works correctly, I'll start out with everything hid or shown. My client side is show. I'm going to set session. And you'll notice something. The server side one went away immediately. The other one refreshed, and now it's hidden. And our client side session variable is now set to that new one there. So that's just a little trick. If you're doing client side stuff, you can use that, refresh the client side computations to force the UX to re-render itself, which is handy in different situations where, let's say you have like a bunch of stuff on your system and you change some client variables. Well, instead of going through and saying, oh, I have to refresh this text box, this button, this container, you can say, hey, guess what? I made a change. Go ahead and refresh my UX, so then it will automatically show and hide and do all the other things you've set up. So therefore, it makes it simple because all you have to do is go into your controls and set your show hide, your calculated field expressions, your enable expressions. And when you trigger that, that command, it reevaluates all of these across your whole UX. So that's kind of a nice feature. And again, for people I went a little too quick, it's called refresh client-side computations. Really, really handy. It kind of, it just saves you a lot of coding because then you don't have to remember what's going on. You just set up all of your controls to look at certain, JavaScript elements or whatever. And then you say, oh, I've made some changes, just refresh everything. And then the user experience changes based upon that. So again, kind of the weeds on both XBasic callbacks for people who aren't used to this, but for people who are more experienced, they may find it interesting. So great question. Thank you. That helped us.
Excellent. I'm not seeing a lot of other questions. There are a few.
I did, yeah,
Uh,
give them a moment there, but I wanted to talk,
sure.
let's
There
see, do I
was
have
one
a
about
search?
moving the search button
Search
in
button,
grid.
yeah. Let's
I don't know
see,
if
I
we have
think
an
I
answer
have
for that yet.
yeah, let me go ahead and go into this component, add a search, go here, and oh, I must have a search right here. And then I'll do working preview after adding that. So I've got a search area up top and the search button here. So currently the question was, we have the search button right here and the individual wanted to move it to the left. And I apologize, it came in this morning, I saw it. I just haven't had a chance to look at that. But I want to go ahead and go to the search field properties. And I think what you can do is this, here's a little trick that you can do. Let's records for page, search, let's see, search style, search rules, search toolbar position is below, search button label. Yeah, so the way I would do that is the following, just to give the person a heads up. What you can do is you can go into the properties for the whole grid. And what you can do is you can create your own action button. So I'm going to go ahead and create my own action button. So action buttons, going to go into action buttons. Here's my action button. This is your ability to add to grids your own buttons. So I'm going to go search, and I'm going to say search. Okay, now I'm going to click OK. I'm going to go to this JavaScript right here. And I think, nope, that doesn't have that. So I'll have to do it in JavaScript here. I'll insert a grid message, which is search, which I believe is submit search form. So basically, when this little JavaScript, it's the equivalent to clicking on the search button here because it submits whatever's in the search form. So now I've created my own search button, which is kind of fun because you can also do something pretty cool. You can make it like, you can use a button styling to make it like, to make it a little more graphical. So I can sit there and go magnifying glass. And so now I've got a button here. And this button, when clicked, will do the search and it looks good. Now, the trick is I need to put that button on my interface. So I'll go over here to my search properties and I'll scroll down to my below search part here. And there's my button I defined. So what this is for people who aren't is that, and actually, let me take a step back. Let me go ahead and show you. If I go ahead and run this right now, you'll notice that that button doesn't show up anywhere. So in my search area, I have an area above, left, and to the right and below. For our grid, I have an area up to the top, left, right, and below. For the detail view area, I have an area above, left, and right. So this is just HTML around here. So built into the capability is that in your grid area, your search area, your detail view, you have search parts. You can go in and put your own text. So let's go ahead and go in here and say, I am going to put my button here. And this can be any HTML you want. So now watch when I do the working preview, you'll see that I now have that little piece of text here below my search area. So again, I went to my search properties, I found the freeform edit regions and put it here. But more importantly, I can go here and put in my search button. So now I can go in here and now I have a search button right there on the left. And it's got a nice little magnifying glass. So I can go in here and go Alf key. When I click this search button, it's going to run that little action JavaScript. And it's equivalent to clicking this button right here. So now I could get rid of this bottom area. I could create my own buttons. I could use HTML. I could use icons. I could any HTML I wanted to create that image and look and feel. And that's a way around it. So the idea is create a button. You create the button at the component grid level by going to properties, action buttons. And then where you want that button to show, if you want that button to be around the edit regions, you can do that here, or you can go and put it near the search area here, or even in the detail view. So you define the button at the top level, but then you add those pieces there. Hopefully that will give you a little pointer how you can. And what's great is now you can style it like crazy So you can make
Right,
it
a lot of
really
control over it
cool.
then. Yeah.
Yeah, you could put CSS. You could put a cool little button bar down there. You could use a third-party graphic. The sky's the limit.
Very cool.
Yeah.
So, a couple more variable questions. The first
Oh,
variable
good.
question is, are these client-side variables, are they going to be the same on all of the browser tabs the way that regular session variables are?
Yes, because what happens is when this UX goes through the on dialog initialize,
Hmm.
it behind the scenes, it takes this session. If I've said that it's published, it takes whatever the current session variable is there.
Great.
So uh, the method you can use, by the way, another shortcut if you wanted to, and this I used before this kind of capabilities, is I can create a text field here, and I'll go hidden fields. And then what I can do is when I load this up, I can say e.control.hidden fields is equal to show. And what will happen is that now it's taken out of the session variable and put it in this hidden field here. And even if I do like a callback, let me go ahead and do a callback, you'll notice it didn't change this field. It just stays the same. So I can actually go in here, hide this field from everybody else. And now that field is always the first time I started this, because the only time that's set is in the, is in the on dialog initialize, I set that field. So even if I do a refresh, the next time I load this UX, it's going to set those hidden fields. Now those hidden fields can be used in your local expressions and things like that. So essentially it's doing the same thing where when I load up this session or this server, it's doing there. But this is a more safe way because you're controlling it, because I think every time you set that session variable, every time this does a refresh, if I use the publish session variables, it's going to say, hey, you know what? I'm going to make sure everybody out in the field on that client has whatever the current version of this is. And so you'll notice when I did my XBasic callback, I didn't actually tell it to republish this. I just said, set this session variable to be hide. And it took care of updating that variable on the local machine. So you have to be careful if you're using this publish session variables, you're going to run into the same problem where one tab sets the session variable to something, then another tab sets it. If you refresh that first tab, it's going to reset that session variable and you got a problem. In our case, what you can do is just, when you load this bad boy, just go ahead and put them in hidden fields. Or you can put in here, you can go e.javascript is equal to, this is going to be wrong, but like local storage, show hide, comma, and don't quote me on this. You can also do this. So this I set a control, which I like because then I can actually see it on the field when it's running. But you could also go ahead and emit some JavaScript, because what happens is when the on dialog initialize happens, it sets everything up, it does all those things, and then anything I put in eJavaScript will be sent to the browser to do it. So I can actually put into local storage my own variables by just emitting this JavaScript, and then that's available later on. So just again, kind of a knit or nap, but neat little technique I've seen before if you want to have some other things happen when this bad boy loads up on the client side. That's just something that can happen from there. Like for sometimes I want to submit a search area right when the UX loads or when the grid loads or do something. So I'll have it do everything and then I'll emit a little piece of JavaScript to do something sort of as a post-processing step.
Cool.
Well, I hope I haven't lost people too bad.
well, we have more questions, so
I read a book
could be
on
a good sign.
Node.js this week.
Did
Everybody,
you really? Oh,
hide your
excellent.
children.
All right, so we've talked about session variables, we've talked about JavaScript variables, we've talked about publishing variables, but here's a brand new variables question, and it has to do with page variables, something which has been with us for a while.
Oh,
Person
yes.
says, what are page variables and what might you use them for?
Okay. Page variables is basically, it comes from really a web browser. When I'm in a web browser,
And also just to I've pasted a little link to the documentation just for you here in the
Cool.
chat. I
Now,
don't think I sent it
there
to
you
everyone,
go.
so we'll just,
Thank you.
there we go.
Cool. So what page variables are is like, if you'll notice that, when you open up a web page, you can pass variables to it. So for instance, you can go my cool page dot a5w is a question mark, customer ID is equal to 5. Okay, so this is built into my URL, and this is considered a page variable. And I can then, in scripts, I can extract that page variable. And that was the original kind of way you would go from page to page and you would pass information from page to page. This is actually using a get process, but you could also use post forms, but it's a little more complicated. So this was a very simple way to say have a list, and on that list you have a link, and on each link you would have call a certain page and then render a different page variable. And then in alpha, you can, on the destination UX or page, you can extract it. And it's actually built into the fabric of alpha. So if I go into this grid here, let's go into this UX right here. I'll go to properties and I'll go to arguments here. So I'm going to go into my arguments and I'm going to create a new argument, test. And you'll notice I have an option here. I tell it what kind of argument it is, but then I can either set it at runtime or I can set the argument to a page, session, or cookie variable, which means that when this UX loads up, it's going to load up this test argument using. So let's make it a little more relevant. Let's say customer ID. So now I'm going to go down here. I'm going to click OK. Now it's saying, OK, I've got this new argument. And most of the time people tend to use session variables to set this. But what I can do is I can go in here and I can say add a new variable. It's a page variable called customer ID. So what will happen is, and if you look right here, this is critical, is that if you call the page this UX is on and you set question mark, the variable name equal to what you want it to be, then alpha will grab that information out and put it into this argument. And then you can use it in your query statement for your grid or whatever you want to use for an argument. So we use page variables less and less, session variables, especially if you're just kind of on a single page, you can pass things back and forth. So that's the concept of a page variable, to be able to pass information from one page to another. And you still see it, like you'll see,
I see things
websites.
paginated often where you have the first 50 results, but you look up at the search bar and it says, showing results, 1 through X. And if you edit that URL and change that X to some other number, you'll see different records.
Yeah, and that's why page variables are kind of a little bit, I'm sometimes a little concerned about them because they're visible to the person in the URL. And that
Right,
means
and they can be manipulated.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's always that always gives me the heebie-jeebies because script kiddies are very smart these days. So yeah, I tend to not use page variables. You may have a situation where you want to. Like here's an example. Maybe you have, like last week we put together what's called a image map, where let's say you had an image and on there you have these different locations. Well, those different locations could be the same URL, but put like question section equals 5. So then I pass it that way. So there are certain situations that are there, but I think there's more effective ways to pass stuff between it. A classic I see with people is that you don't even use a session variable. I actually had a couple designers or developers who said, you know what they do is they can actually write on one page or one UX, they can, when they're finished with it, they can write that information into a database field, then open up another UX, and when they open up that UX, read the data out of that database field and then take the action. So they're not even using session variables. They're not even using page variables to go between things. They just use the database as a scratch pad. And databases and stuff are so fast that the user doesn't even see anything. And that gave them the ability to have, and that was just a technique that I saw out there. But page variables are valid. They're fully supported by the tool. So feel free to use them if you want. Nobody's going to yell at you, and those are going to be good.
But they'll be able to see anything you query right there in the URL.
Yeah. And I'm not a big fan of that. And the nice thing now is that it used to be
So
when you developed an alpha
sorry to interrupt
solution.
though, but sort of what's
Oh,
the right way now? I think it's using the request object. It seems to be a typical way now to allow data to be
yes.
pulled in.
Yeah,
And maybe in the last 2 minutes you could touch on that if you don't mind.
yeah. So the other option is that when you open up or when the server side runs,
Mhm.
you have access to what's called the request object here. And the request object, and you have what are called request variables. They're very much like session variables, but what it is when one page passes information to another page in the web browser, you can embed information into it. So as you can see, we embedded in the query that, customer ID equals 5. But you could actually create what's called a post transaction where you don't actually see it in the URL. It's kind of buried in the headers. And in there, you can then use the request variables to extract that information out. So that's really just a 2-second kind of thing there. So there's kind of different ways to skin the cat. But I tend to use session variables if I'm not worried about multi-tabs. But more and more now, I'm starting to use arguments because then I know once it's open and the arguments are set, then every time I refresh that UX, the arguments are not going to change. So something to be, where because this on dialog initialize only runs once when the UX is first rendered or grid is first rendered and sent down to the web browser to be used.
Fantastic.
Well, it's kind of a Halloween one. We went into code, which is very scary for some people.
Very spooky for a lot of people.
We have a very smart group of developers. They're not scared of that.
But other people hung out to the end. I'm very happy about that. That's great.
No, we appreciate it.
We do have a request for another session, and that has to do with the fact that sort of the Google has changed the API when it comes to maps just a bit. And maybe if we've done mapping before, but maybe if we could just jump back into that maybe in another session, that would be kind of interesting if other people would think so.
You got it. Yeah.
Reminder, if you have any ideas for anything you would like us to cover, go ahead, send it into guides@alphasoftware.com. Even if it's not a question, but you just want to maybe have a high level discussion of something, just send it in. We can always happy to hear what you're interested in. It looks like that is it for today. Dion, thank you very much for presenting.
Yes,
and thanks
happy
Halloween for showing up,
everybody.
And happy Halloween as well. Great.
Sorry I scared you. See, it was that I scared you at the beginning too. Is that today was a fright day. Where is he?
Yeah, he's very good.
It's going to be a very short demo without. Yeah. So.
Thanks again. Thanks everyone who showed up, and we look forward to seeing you at our next Alpha Anywhere demo and Q&A webcast. Take care and goodbye.